Jumping straight back into it, if you missed the previous segment of the show, I started my mock draft, my first and only mock draft this season. I went through picks 1 through 16 in the previous segment. And before I go through the rest of the first round, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments that you want to make, especially around my mock draft, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen. Using this, I may receive your questions and read them on air during the show. Using that way, it's more engaging, more interactive, and it's a massive help for the show. So again, if you're able to use the tip and donations link, it would be greatly appreciated. The link being GSMCPodcast.net. We always thank you guys greatly whenever you're able to do that with any question or comment. But moving on now to finish off the first round on today's episode of the podcast, straight back into it with 17. The Jacksonville Jaguars select Terrion Arnold, my favorite defensive back in this year's draft. They need some help in the secondary. They already brought in Darnell Savage from the Green Bay Packers through free agency. Could have gone wide receiver here too, but I think it's just a bit too early to go and get a Brian Thomas and A.D. Mitchell, one of those guys. I think defensive back is in more of a necessity for them, less top-tier talent, in my opinion. They go and get my favorite one at 17. Then you move on to 18, and it isn't too early because it's one pick after. The Cincinnati Bengals get Brian Thomas because yesterday T. Higgins requested a trade once again. I know Trey Hendrickson also requested a trade, but after the big news that Trey Hendrickson requested a trade, you could look at edge rusher here, but after the news broke that Trey Hendrickson requested a trade, he said that reports came out that he might have also considered retirement and that he really doesn't want to leave the Bengals, just really looking for a contract here. Not that the Bengals would really consider trading him anyway, but he even considered retirement at one point this offseason, so there's certainly something there with Trey Hendrickson and what he's trying to do with his career. But T. Higgins also requested another trade. I think they go Brian Thomas here in case they do move on from T. Higgins, in case this is the last run of him. They reunite one LSU receiver that worked out for them in Jamar Chase with another one just a few years later. That LSU connection, I'm sure it makes too much sense for the Bengals not to do it. With the possibility of losing T. Higgins, I think they go with Brian Thomas. Then at 19, the Rams draft Byron Murphy, arguably one of the best defensive players in this draft. A lot of people have him going a lot earlier, but the way I have it panned out, I think it is a perfect fit. And a bit fortunate that he isn't drafted before, but I just think there's bigger needs elsewhere for the other teams. And it is an instant replacement for Aaron Donald, one of the best defensive players in this draft, like I mentioned. Bringing in an instant replacement for Donald. Of course, you're not going to expect the same results right away, but it is a guy that you can plug in right away in that massive hole on your defensive line. I have a lot of faith in Byron Murphy. I think he's one of the best ones at his position, without a doubt. So the Rams make this pick, the first pick that they've made in the first round since 2016. Then the Pittsburgh Steelers at 20. A lot of talk about trading up, maybe getting a wide receiver, trading with the Broncos. That doesn't work out for them, and they take a center. One of the most underwhelming picks this whole draft. Not to throw shade on the offensive line. It's huge, especially the center position, because you're calling out plays, you're handing the ball to the quarterback. It is massive, but it just isn't as exciting as getting a wide receiver or defensive back or edge rusher, any of those positions. That's just how it is. I have them selecting Graham Barton from Duke. He played offensive tackle during his time there at Duke towards the end. Highly regarded as the best center in this year's draft, and I think his ability to play in multiple positions on that offensive line is really attractive to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It is something that I think they value highly from anybody that they draft there. You see Broderick Jones, he's a left tackle, but they played him at right tackle, and they have other guys on their line as well that they could move around. I think they really like Graham Barton, and they're going to take him at number 20. Then at 21, the Miami Dolphins take Jared Verse, the defensive end from Florida State. You can't have too many edge rushers with what you saw this past season when Bradley Chubb got hurt, when Jalen Phillips got hurt, how much different and vulnerable their defense was after that point. They had a solid defense, I thought, but then it all just came crumbling down when you have no pass rush. You can never have too many of them. Jared Verse is one of the best ones after Dallas Turner. To get him at 21 is a steal, in my opinion, for the Miami Dolphins that just continue to add to their defense this offseason. Then the Denver Broncos now at 22 after that trade they made with the Philadelphia Eagles. They also go pass rusher. They go Latu, defensive end from UCLA. Again, there is a lot of pass rushers in this year's draft, a position of value that you can never have too many there. It's good value here for their defense. You don't want to miss out on the potential run of edge rushers that could happen late in the first round. I think this is a perfect spot for them to add to their defense and then wait in the second round where there's still a ton of talent left everywhere to try and nail down an offensive player for whatever quarterback lines up for them next year. So Denver goes defense in the first round. Then we stick with defense, and the Los Angeles Chargers at number 23 with that trade they made with the Minnesota Vikings in my mock draft earlier on. I have them drafting Cooper DeJean. Probably my biggest surprise of this mock draft. You're watching it, you're following it, and you think Cooper DeJean, why would that be the pick? They need a wide receiver. How could they not draft one in the first round? Well, I just think Cooper DeJean fits the kind of player that Jim Harbaugh is looking for. You saw the reports of him going earlier, of the early reports around Cooper DeJean, around his bad injury that he suffered this past year, showing the toughness to come back, put on a private workout for these teams. A lot of teams showed up to that, according to various sources. For him to come back and actually impress a lot of people at his workout, I think the Chargers would be very impressed with that. They addressed offense in the first pick that they had at number 11. That was the Vikings. They addressed their offensive line. Now their defense also isn't looking great. Other than Derwin James and Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, they need certainly some secondary help, and Cooper DeJean is a player that you could line up everywhere, which again would intrigue Jim Harbaugh even more. I have them selecting the secondary player, defensive back or safety, out of Iowa at number 23. Then at 24, the Dallas Cowboys, I think almost a no-brainer. They go with Tyler Guyton, an offensive tackle from Oklahoma. They need a lot of positions after free agency and how many people they lost. Offensive tackle, offensive line in general is one of the biggest and significant positions that you need in the NFL. To draft Tyler Guyton here makes too much sense for them to really go all in on this year and try to get the best out of Dak if you're going to end up losing him next year. Then at 25, the Green Bay Packers stay put and they draft Kool-Aid McKinstry, the defensive back from Alabama. They need secondary help. In the past, I have had them take Tyler Nubin as an example for secondary to have a great duo there with Xavier McKinney. But I think the safety value has sort of dropped as the days have gone on, as now we are at the first round of the NFL draft. Corner still is one of the most important positions. They need somebody opposite of Jair Alexander. I'm pretty certain that Kool-Aid McKinstry has grown a lot more teams. He impressed at his pro day after the combine. Didn't work too well for him. He injured his foot again at the combine, but then he looked very impressive at his pro day. Again, too good for the Packers to pass up here, to have two very solid, very fluid corners in Jair and now Kool-Aid McKinstry. Then, heading towards the end of the first round, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft Darius Robinson, edge rusher out of Missouri. I've seen guys, analysts like Peter Schrager and others on the NFL Network say that Darius Robinson has risen up a lot of draft boards after the Senior Bowl and impressing everyone there. After, of course, the season that he had, the Bucs need pass rushers after they lost Shaq Barrett to the Miami Dolphins. And right now at edge rusher, I just think they're a bit too young. Yeah, they're bringing in another younger guy, but he is a senior. He has a lot of reps to his name already, experience there with Darius Robinson. They definitely need to upgrade that defense, so the Bucs go with Darius Robinson. Then at 27, we continue on with that run of edge rushers that I mentioned earlier on. The Arizona Cardinals draft Chop Robinson, the edge rusher from Penn State. They already addressed offense with Marvin Harrison. Now they need some defensive help. Jonathan Gannon is a defensive guy. He knows how much it is important to have a good edge rusher. You saw how prominent their rush was with the Philadelphia Eagles. That last year he was there when they made the Super Bowl. He needs certainly some edge pressure from the interior or exterior. I think he goes with Chop Robinson here. Then at 28, the Buffalo Bills don't have to move to get the receiver that they need. They draft A.D. Mitchell out of Texas, wide receiver, more of a Gabe Davis sort of build, but I think he's a bit more talented, has a higher ceiling than Gabe Davis, and you don't have to trade up to get him. The teams before you don't really need him, so the Bills can stay put, don't have to do anything, and still get a potential replacement for Stephon Diggs. Then at 29, I have another trade happening, my final trade in this first round. I have the Washington Commanders trading back into the first round to draft offensive tackle out of Georgia, Amarius Mims. The Commanders drafted Jaden Daniels, that's great, but they also now need somebody to protect them. Their offensive line, they've addressed some of it in the offseason with some of their signings. Now they draft an offensive tackle that has a lot of potential, doesn't have a lot of experience yet. They're certainly going to have to groom him there, but he is a project for the future. They are building something for the long run. They draft Amarius Mims, and from the point of the Detroit Lions, they don't make a first-round selection, but Dan Campbell said recently that they would be willing to trade down if their guy wasn't there. I don't see too many players that fit the Detroit Lions with the way I have it falling, so they trade out of the first round and accumulate more picks in the later rounds of the draft. Then the final picks weren't too hard to make here for this first round. The Baltimore Ravens select Nate Wiggins, defensive back out of Clemson. They find another corner to line up opposite of Marlon Humphrey, and they lost Geno Stone this year, which I think was a massive loss for them to the Bengals nonetheless in that secondary as well. They get two very reliable corners that can play press man coverage. Nate Wiggins is super fast as well, so with the amount of receivers you have in the AFC North to add on to that, I think this would be a no-brainer for the Ravens because of how far he fell. To get him at 30, I think is great value for him. Then the 49ers select wide receiver Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. In case Brandon Ayuk, something happens with him, he is traded during the draft, which I sort of expect at some point. You bring in somebody that can instantly at least step in there, bring some excitement to the team out of South Carolina as well, like Debo was so many years ago. Similar builds to some aspect, I think that would help. He is a willing run blocker to play into that whole system that Kyle Shanahan has. They jumped the Kansas City Chiefs, who were a candidate to draft him, but I think the 49ers wouldn't miss on this opportunity. So they get a wide receiver to add to their team in case Brandon Ayuk does leave. And the final pick of the first round, the Kansas City Chiefs at pick number 2, they select Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona. He replaces Donovan Smith there at left tackle, who is still a free agent. The Chiefs decided not to re-sign him. He is on the older side, and left tackle is one of the most important positions in general. Offensive line is as a whole, but left tackle, especially for a right-handed throwing quarterback, you have to protect his blind side, and there's no quarterback more valuable in the NFL than Patrick Mahomes. They certainly need to address that in some manner. Jordan Morgan falls to them at 32. Instant replacement because he plays left tackle. He could slide in there right away, or they could maybe sign a cheap free agent and have him groomed into that role. But regardless, they need some help at left tackle to protect Patrick Mahomes' blind side, and they could wait on receiver because this draft has a ton of them just waiting in the second round of the NFL draft. But that is who I have falling in the first round. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of my picks. Do you agree with some of them? Do you think somebody should have been in the first round that wasn't? Let me know all down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to respond to them if I see them at some point. But with that being said, that'll do it for me on today's episode. Very excited to see how this first round of the NFL draft pans out. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. But if you want to see more of me and the show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted daily, full live recorded shows that are all on there for you to watch back, and individual segment videos. If you want to go back and watch a certain segment or you really enjoyed one specific part of the live shows, you're able to do that on both YouTube channels. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football discussions around the draft, certainly over these next few days, with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host, saying thank you guys for joining me on today's episode, and I'm hoping to see you guys back here again tomorrow to react to some of the first round and get into the second round of the NFL draft.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.